Welcome to our Women's Health podcast series. My name is Abigail Hole and I'm a communications assistant at Bournemouth University. Through this podcast, I'll be speaking with members of the Centre for Midwifery and Women's Health to learn more about women's health and the amazing research being conducted by the Centre. Today I'm joined by Kate Ratley, PhD student and Human Performance Lab Technician at Bournemouth University. Hi Kate, how are you today?
Hi Abby, I'm well, thank you.
So I thought I'd just begin by talking a bit about what your PhD is looking at. So could you introduce us to what you're researching, what it's all about?
So my PhD is in exercise physiology, so broadly that is about the functioning of living organisms, so that can go from cells through to humans, so my stuff is more on the human end of things. So in terms of exercise, it's a lot of areas, so we have to talk about respiratory, cardiovascular, metabolic, neuromuscular. It covers a massive range of systems in the body. So what you generally look at in exercise physiology is the effect when you exercise acutely. So if you were just to come into the lab and you do one exercise test and we study you while you do that, or chronically. So maybe we'd give you an exercise intervention. So perhaps we'd send you away and say, you do 30 minutes a week and then we come back and we study you again and we see how things have changed. So in terms of my research, it's more about the acute effects of exercise or the acute effects of exercising on the body. So like I was saying, we do mainly menopause and menstrual cycle work in my research. So we're looking at acute and chronic hormone deficits. So that's whether you experience a decline in sex hormones for a short time. So for example, in the menstrual cycle, you would experience declines at certain points in the cycle, or during something like menopause, where it's much more chronic. So for example, you would have fluctuations in hormones as you go through perimenopause, and then a chronic decline when you're in postmenopause. My original interests sort of rose in menstrual cycle research. It actually originated in sex differences. So, my master's research was about sex differences in muscle activation between front and back squats between men and women. And the thing that came out of that research was I only had 5 female participants and I had 40 men. The disparity of women in strength sports is massive. And what we're seeing now is a massive rise in female participation in strength sports. So we're seeing, we see female influencers in the gym all the time. It is happening, like the rise is happening. But that research was back in 2020, so midst of COVID. So that highlighted something to me, which was we're not seeing women participating in research. And then the Invisible Women paper came out, and it was like, whoa, we actually aren't seeing women in research, 6%, like that's nothing. So when I started my PhD, we were originally sort of going down the menstrual cycle route. And then after speaking with my supervisors, we sort of hooked a left and decided that actually we think menopause is a much more ignored area currently. And then also from speaking to women currently going through or who have been through menopause, it's really important that we give them a voice. And it's trying to give women that platform to speak. And I think that's what my research is all about. I'm running PPI and qualitative research alongside my quantitative stuff because I think it's really, really important that we hear what women have to say.
Do you have any funding for your research?
Yes, so I'm on a PhD studentship here at Bournemouth, so we get funded to run research projects.
And how did you become involved with the Centre for Midwifery and Women's Health?
So my PhD is under a 3-woman supervisory team, one of which is my primary, and she is a researcher in pregnancy under the Centre for Midwifery and Women's Health. So it's through that mainly that I've become involved. The centre has been absolutely invaluable in providing seminars and development opportunities for PGRs and early career researchers. Very, very early in my PhD presentations and seminars has been through that centre.
So what's different about your research study to other papers which have been published which are looking at the impact of exercise on sex hormones and exercise physiology?
So we're seeing like a really increased demand for menstrual cycle research now. I'm sure you've seen in the media research into the menstrual cycle and the changes that come around in physiology and exercise physiology due to the menstrual cycle. And that's especially prominent in terms of athletes and elite athletes and what happens to them throughout their athletic careers, particularly in professional athletes. For more on that, you can sort of look at the Invisible Women articles, talking about the involvement of women in sports science research is only 6% of the articles that have been published. So it's a really, really small part of sports science research has actually involved women at all. So that was effectively a big, big call to action for more research in women's health. So the first thing is tackling that. So like I said, the main focus is currently a bit more performance oriented. So how do we optimize female performance? Do we need to change training around the menstrual cycle? And that's centred around hormone changes through the menstrual cycle being the major driver of that. But then we also have to talk about the actual phenomena within the menstrual cycle, like menstrual bleed, and how that affects female performance. So that's not something that, it's not just the hormones that are causing that there. That's actually bleeding is causing your change in performance potentially. So we have to talk about ratings of perceived exertion and how women are feeling when they exercise and that kind of thing.
And I feel like over recent years there's been more popularity of menstrual tracking apps like Flow. Do you think that's sparked more interest and research into the impact of menopause and during the menstrual cycle on performance?
I don't know whether it is that or whether it's just empowering women to speak up. So more and more athletes come, like Keely Hodgkinson did an interview the other week where she talked about more information for coaches on menstrual cycles. Women are talking about it, athletes are talking about it. And one of the first things that kind of came to light when I started my PhD was women are already talking about this stuff. We are talking about this stuff in our groups, in our, I remember being at school and you would talk to your friends about your period. It's very normal to talk to your peers. But actually, it's talking to men and talking to others outside of peer groups about what you're going through. For example, one thing that comes across quite a lot in my research is mothers not telling their daughters about menopause. So, for example, I didn't really know what menopause was until I started my PhD. So it's almost making sure that we have that passage of knowledge and that it's not something that's taboo, because I think that's how so many women do feel about menopause. It's a taboo topic and it's quite difficult to talk about generally. And I think it's obviously for me to say I'm 26, I'm not menopause, I don't know what it feels like to go through menopause. So it's really, really important to be objective in that regard. But I can speak for the women that have said to me or shared with me their experiences of it.
Does menopause change the way in which women respond to exercise?
The general consensus of that is the work that I do is in energy expenditure. So looking at whether they actually expend less energy doing the same amount of exercise as someone who's premenopausal. If that's the case, then we need to be changing the amount of exercise that we recommend. So for example, the current recommendation from the government is 150 minutes. And then there's also recommendations that you need to expend 2,000 calories per week based on some research. So what if women are doing that 150 minutes and they're expending 100 less calories than their premenopausal counterparts? Does that mean that they therefore need to do an extra X minutes of exercise per week to achieve the same results? Or to maintain their functionality and their health, because that's really important. If they do, then we need this information for women, because actually a lot of the questions that I get when I have women into the lab is, I'm putting on weight like I never have before. I don't know how to, maintain my weight. I want to lose weight, or I just want to stay healthy. I just want to stay functional. I'm much less able to recover from exercise than I have been previously. So this is all sort of anecdotal evidence, but it's how do we answer that? So if it is that they need to do 10 minutes more exercise to achieve the same goals, then that needs to be publicised, because actually that's answering the question that they're asking.
So at the moment we have the Olympics and there's lots of news articles that are coming out about how impressive these women are who've just had babies and they're now competing against like top athletes in other countries. And I've read the comments on these posts. People are saying this putting too much pressure on women's bodies.
I think this is really interesting. I think it's all about when women feel ready, and I don't think we should ever be putting barriers on women to rejoining participation in sport. The fantastic thing about this Olympics is we're seeing a much more 50-50 split in men and women who are participating. So this is the first Olympics where we've had actual parity, and that's fantastic. We're also seeing an increase in age of participants. Like, I'm sure we all know about Simone Biles. She's 27 and she's competing in gymnastics, but the average age of gymnasts has gone up to 22 rather than, I don't know what it was previously, but I think it was sort of 18. So we're looking at women who are partaking in sport and competing in elite sport to much higher levels for much longer, and that's amazing, because look at what we're capable of. And we've always been capable of that, but we haven't been given the right resources and the right coaching and the right support, and that postpartum support is massive, because I think from what it sounds like, it's almost like people give up on women once they've had a baby, and there's rugby players who talk about that as well, and that return to sport postpartum into rugby, which is a contact sport, and whether that's safe for them. If they feel it's safe for them, absolutely it's safe for them. And it's all about making sure that it is safe for them. So, for example, from educated coaches, educated health professionals in pregnancy, but it's like making sure that return to sport is safe for them and especially how they feel about whether it's safe for them or not. This isn't my area, so it's more talking from like a personal perspective. But I do think it's fantastic that we're able to compete for longer, because actually men have been doing it for a long time. So there's a skateboarder, he's 50 and he's competing. That's fantastic. But we're also seeing women at 15 competing in the skateboarding. So the one thing about the skateboarding is they've got this massive age range, and no one's sort of said anything about that. But it's amazing. And we can have that in all sport, especially, so there's things coming out about endurance sports and whether the fact that women are potentially less fatigable, making them better at endurance sports. And actually, potentially, the wealth of experience that women gain through time, so between starting competing potentially at quite a young age, endurance sports involves a lot more pacing and a lot more understanding of your body and how it works for you. So potentially, is it that you're getting better because of your wealth of experience of the sport, if that makes sense? So actually, that return to sport from pregnancy, you know your body so much better, but it can also be a time where you don't know your body at all. So I think it's just important for women to have a voice in that, in whether they want to come back to sport, and if they do want to come back to sport, making it safe for them to come back to sport, or making sure that they feel safe. I think it's a lot of things, a lot of factors. But I do think it's fantastic to see.
What does your day-to-day kind of work day look like?
I am the Human Performance Lab technician, so I work doing that for 2 days a week. So Monday to Wednesday I work as a PhD student, and Thursday, Friday I work as a lab technician. One thing I really like about doing a PhD is very different every single day. So Monday to Wednesday, that can involve active research, so it can have participants in out for testing. Like one of my busiest days is probably having about 7 participants in back to back, bearing in mind that their sessions are between 90 minutes to 2 hours. So it's busy. So that's in like the depths of data collection. It's busy days. But then sometimes that can sort of involve some data analysis, writing manuscripts, and sometimes bits and bobs in the biosciences labs. So we run, obviously doing hormones, we run the blood samples here at Bournemouth in collaboration with the biosciences department. So it can involve a bit of that. That takes all day. That is a long process. There's lots of incubations, there's lots of pipetting. So that's Monday to Wednesday. And then Thursday to Friday, like I said, I support teaching in the Human Performance Lab. So that's providing technical support, supporting dissertation students to design and run their projects. And there's occasionally bits of teaching in there on some units if they feel that I add something to them.
And can you talk a bit about like what data you're collecting at the moment with participants?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am near the tail end of a very long research project, which has been absolutely massive, and I've loved running it. It's been really, really long days and really, really long hours, and it's all worth it. So I've had 80 participants in and out of the lab for 4 visits. So they come in for the first visit, they have a blood sample taken by a phlebotomist, then they have their body composition done, and then they do an exercise assessment. So the first visit, that exercise assessment is a maximal exercise test. So that means we get you on the bike and you do a warm-up, and then the intensity gets increasingly difficult until you can't continue, so volitional exhaustion. So we're putting women through it. And then they come in either once a month, depending on if they're naturally menstruating, or they can come in at any time if they're using hormonal contraceptives or if they're postmenopausal. And they do exercise assessments at a percentage of that VO2 max, so that percentage of their 100%. So effectively what we're looking at is, with that energy expenditure idea, is if you were to exercise for half an hour at low intensity, if you were premenopausal, how long would you need to exercise for in postmenopause? The general hypothesis is there will be more exercise that will be required if you're looking to seek the same results. So we're doing that at the moment. We're also running sort of patient public involvement research about how we can support women to exercise in perimenopause and postmenopause, how they would like that information disseminated, and how we can support women generally. So that's really interesting. It adds that sort of extra lived experience. And like I said earlier, I think it's just really important that we're giving voice to women who kind of historically have not had one, or have not been able to voice how they're feeling or what their experiences are.
And are the participants, are these all women from Dorset?
So our menopause samples are between 45 and 60, and that's, 40 and 60 for perimenopause and 45 and 60 for postmenopause, to try and limit that age element of things. I've been really lucky with recruitment. I remember when I started the PhD, I had a comment in a panel, and they were saying, how do you expect to get this many women? You just won't get this many women to participate. And I said, I will. If I can persuade 40 men to do squats in the gym, I can persuade women to take part in this research. And I didn't even need to persuade, because women are so keen to take part, and it's absolutely fantastic. Like, I've never known anything like it. I genuinely thought I was going to struggle with recruitment. And I was worried, actually, because in my masters, for example, I was in the weightlifting club, I was in the powerlifting club. I knew people who would do it. And then when I moved here, first of all, I moved from Lancaster, so I moved halfway across the country. And then second of all, I was in a population that I didn't really have any connections. I didn't have any pre-existing relationships with anybody to access this group. So word of mouth has been absolutely huge. So people telling their friends, and this is about the voices of women, women are talking about what they're doing, and what, they're telling other women about their experiences and what they're doing, and that's really important. So most of the participants that I've had through have been friends of people that are already participating. And I think that's huge. One of the main ways I started with recruitment was reaching out to a local group, so cycling groups, cold water swimming, various different groups of that, and then also menopause-centered groups. So that was through social media, and then I also had posters everywhere and emailed participants from previous studies, providing they were happy for me to contact them for further research if they had already consented. So I think word of mouth is huge, and it's the best way to recruit. And I think I've also been really lucky that in Dorset, so a lot of people came in and they were saying, I was just the other day talking about the fact we don't have enough work doing in women, and I saw this study and I had to take part because I'd just been complaining about it. So it's like that women are seeing that the research isn't in their area or about them, and then they see a project and they go, I need to take part in that because I've recognised it as a problem as well.
And how does exercise physiology affect women across the life cycle?
I think that's the major question, isn't it? So like I said, about that energy expenditure decline with age. So we see a decline in energy expenditure with age, and that's expected. But then we also think that menopause potentially accelerates that decline. So it's working out. And it's the age-old question of how do you separate age and menopause? Because they are two things that are happening in tandem. So midlife is happening, so there's a lot of changes happening due to being in midlife, and then menopause is happening as well. So with the hormone element is how do you split the changes in hormones with being in midlife? And that's a big problem about how you do that. So the really interesting thing about hormones is they actually might affect our metabolism. We're seeing not much change in terms of acute changes in hormones in the menstrual cycle on metabolism. But when you look at rats and male studies, when they did male supplementation with estrogen, they actually increase reliance on fat as a fuel. And then when you can knock out estrogen receptors in a rat and you can do gene knockouts, etc. That can also change the glycolysis, so breakdown and metabolism of glucose and the change of fat oxidation. So the question is does this happen in women, and do their fueling habits need to change? And the question about that is, if it's happening in men and rats and we're not seeing it in menstrual cycle research, what is mitigating the change? So is it something else? So is it the hormone progesterone, which is historically known as the antagonist of estrogen? Or is there something else happening that's limiting us seeing these effects? Is it that in men and rats, they're just physiologically different and we're not seeing those changes because their sex hormone makeups are different? I think it's really important to consider as well that there are barriers to exercise and to accessing exercise that have nothing to do with exercise physiology affecting women in the life cycle. It's actually just access to exercise. So that's multiple sociological and physiological factors that affect it. But we can't forget that women have really, really busy lives, and that exercise can often move to the bottom of the list. So we can't even talk about physiology there. Women in midlife, there's kids, children, partners, pets, friends that already limit the ability of women to engage in physical activity. And then you also have societal issues like gym culture. It's a massive limit to commitment to gym settings because it's scary. Like a lot of the time, I've been weightlifting for 6 years, 7 years, 8, and I still sometimes experience anxiety when I go into the gym, and I'm an experienced lifter. So I can't imagine what it's like. I can't even remember what it was like when I walked in for the first time. So actually that's a massive barrier as well. For all women across the whole life cycle is how do you access gym when they feel like such a male-dominated space? And I will give credit to influencers there. There's plenty of influencers who are trying to change the way that we view gym culture. And I think that's really important. But The other thing is even running outside is a challenge for women because of society. So actually access to exercise that is deemed accessible, air quotes, isn't, because it's not safe for women sometimes, especially in the winter. So we have to consider other elements that are affecting women's participation in exercise outside of the fact that their physiology is changing and then their body is changing. So I think that's crucial.
I've seen the performance laboratories that we have on campus, which have lots of equipment to measure blood pressure, body fat, and other physical activity and performance measurements. How have you? I think you spoke a bit earlier about your how you use these facilities as part of your research. If you would like to just give a brief overview of what facilities that you've used that are on campus.
We have loads in the lab, and it's really obviously important that we cover multiple areas of physiology, and we have fantastic equipment to do that. So my work involves a breath by breath system. So that's where you are hooked up to a mask, and we measure the O2 that you're breathing in and the CO2 that you're breathing out whilst you do things. Body fat percentage, we're actually collaborating with the wonderful Sport BU. They have a body composition analyzer up in their gym. It's an InBody, and we're utilising that in their research. So it's really, really kind of them to work with us on that, because that's really, really helpful in sports science research. It's a really, really quick body composition measurement. Otherwise, we'd be doing skin folds, and that's not always comfortable for some populations. They're not comfortable with you doing that. So actually being able to access the bioelectrical impedance is huge. So thank you so much to Sport BU for that. What else do I use? Well, I conduct phlebotomy in the lab, so we're very, very lucky to have a space where we can do that. So a clinical lab. Yeah, we've used all the facilities, and that kind of the biggest thing about dissertations is making sure that students feel that they can do what they want in the best way. So letting them know what we have available to them and what they can use and how they can use it. Our department in the Department of Rehabilitation and Sports Sciences, everybody has such varied interests that we have such rich conversations about various different topics in sports science and exercise physiology, because everybody has different knowledge that they can add to your bow.
What general advice would you give to women who are looking to incorporate exercise more into their routine?
Every little helps. It's never too late to start. Or like we were talking about the Olympics, there's people in the Olympics who didn't start exercise until they were at uni or later life, and it's never too late. And like we can always start doing more exercise, and whether that be a couch to 5K or walking a little bit more. I've been talking about weightlifting, but something that's much more in the media now is about, maintaining bone density and increasing muscle mass as you go into menopause, and get in touch with local weightlifting clubs, get in touch with local gyms for beginners, adult gymnastics, park run, beginners yoga. There's like so many fantastic entry points to sport at kind of any age. And I will recommend CrossFit with a bit of caution. There's fantastic CrossFit boxes out there, and they are run by the philosophy of CrossFit is that it is for all and it is adaptable. And I think you have to look for the right box and the right coach, but actually CrossFit is fantastic for that functionality element of things, provided it's done right. But then there's also, access to functional fitness. There's plenty of functional fitness gyms in Bournemouth for that. But I do think it's really important for us to make fitness more accessible to all women at all ages and stages of life. I used to work at a gym up in Lancaster, and they had this really good scheme called Fit Mums, where like mums could bring their young children in to the exercise classes and they would be involved in that. And they had this thing called Young at Heart, which was for over 60s, and that involved kind of adapted exercise for those that didn't feel comfortable in general classes. And I think that's really important, is that we actually are targeting points of life where potentially women are vulnerable to dropping out of exercise. So we always talk about kind of the adolescence point as well, where girls stop exercising, and then can we put like target and pinpoint points where women are likely to drop out from exercising. So when they've got young children, or when they're in their midlife, is there something we can do by offering exercise classes for that specific point? More leisure centres and gyms could offer these kinds of things. They are out there, it's just increasing the visibility and the accessibility to women who might not see it.
And to finish each podcast, I've been asking guests, what conversations about women's health do you feel we need to be having more of, what we're not talking enough about?
I think all areas of women's health warrant more discussion. I think that's a really, really difficult question. The media is picking up much more stories with female athlete injuries and return to sport postpartum and menopause. Some of Davina McCall's work, we're seeing women's health in the mainstream media, which is actually incredible. But the conversations, like I've been saying, they are happening and often happening between women. And actually, like I was saying, we need men involved in these conversations to have any chance of change. And we also need to educate young people about menopause and about women's health, and that comes from the very start of education, isn't it? It's about making sure that people are informed throughout their whole lives. And like I was saying earlier about the fact that I didn't really know what menopause was either until I started really, really actively trying to learn. So it's how do we make sure that people know about this from the very beginning?
Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. This is the final podcast in our BU Women's Health podcast series. We hope you've enjoyed learning more about different research connected to our Centre for Midwifery and Women's Health. If you'd like to find out more about the Research Centre, please visit the Bournemouth University website. And if you haven't already heard other podcasts in our series, please take a look at our playlist. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.